So welcome everybody. Good evening. My name is again Ali Ghilarducci. I'm the Supervisor of Community Engagement and External Communications.
Buenas noches y bienvenidos a todos otra vez. Yo soy Ali Ghilarducci y soy la supervisora de comunicaciones para la comunidad y de comunicaciones externas.
We will have simultaneous interpretation, so it'll be at the same time for this meeting, but right now it's consecutive just so that we can let folks know how to access that simultaneous interpretation.
Vamos a tener interpretación simultánea, lo que quiere decir es que vamos a interpretar al mismo tiempo que los presentadores están hablando. En este momento está siendo consecutivo, es para que las personas que están presentes sepan cómo acceder a este servicio.
So if you would like to use the interpretation services in Spanish, you are going to go ahead and find your Zoom toolbar. It's usually at the bottom of your screen, and you'll click the little round globe icon and select the language Spanish.
Y si ustedes prefieren usar la opción de interpretación en español, lo que tienen que hacer es, por lo general está un icono en la parte de abajo a mano derecha, es como un globo terráqueo, solamente presionan ese icono y escogen el idioma español para poder escuchar la interpretación en español.
Okay, and with that, I need just one moment to assign our interpreters, and I will then get it started.
En este momento ya nos van a asignar a nosotros los intérpretes y ya podemos comenzar con la reunión.
Okay, so I'm starting interpretation now. All right, thanks so much, everybody. So welcome and thanks so much for being with us this evening. We are having a conversation about student online safety with this transition to having so many of our students learning in a remote setting. We wanted to make sure that we shared some information about some of the tools the district uses to keep our students safe. So that's what we'll be talking about tonight. So I'll just review our agenda. We're going to do right now a welcome and some housekeeping. We do also have closed captioning this evening available. And what I'd like to do for introductions would be to, if you could in the chat enter your role in connection to AISD, what school community you might be connected to, that would be super lovely. And then we will do introductions of the presenters that are going to be sharing information and responding to questions this evening. Then we'll go over some agreements to make sure that we have a really productive conversation this evening. We do have a presentation for y'all that we'll get started with. We are here this evening to listen, to hear from our families, from our staff. What are your experiences with these tools? What concerns might you have? But we do, before we get into the dialogue with y'all, we want to make sure that we level set and get the same information to everyone so that everyone understands what are these tools, what are they not. And even after the presentation, I'm sure there'll still be a little confusion because it's a lot of information, but we'll do our best. But we will save plenty of time for the Q&A at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and let our presenters introduce themselves, starting with Ms. Kia Wallace.
Hi, everyone. I'm the Threat Assessment Coordinator in Health Services. I'm looking forward to talking a little bit more about the alerts that I do for the district.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Erin Bound-Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Academics and Blended Learning, and I'm excited to be here with you as well. Thanks for having me.
And I'm Sharon Laidlaw. I'm one of the lead technology design coaches for the district, and I'll be talking a little bit about GoGuardian Teacher, and I'm very happy to be here with you.
And I do see that we have several other, I can't see everyone because I'm sharing my screen, but I see we do have several other AISD staff here. So we appreciate y'all for joining us, and I imagine are here to learn with us and also provide some support if there's any questions that our presenters maybe don't have all the information about. So the agreements that we are establishing we'd like to establish this evening, and we'd definitely be happy to accept other suggestions of agreements, but we would like to ask that folks hear the experiences of others. So come listening. I always like to say, seek to understand, not necessarily just to be heard. Speak from your own experience. So that's really about talking about what you've experienced yourself rather than necessarily talking for others or what you've heard from others. What's said here stays here, what's learned here leaves here. So we really want anything that you learn here, that we want to make sure that you go out and tell others, make sure that you help us spread this information. But by the what's said here stays here part, it really is about privacy. So if someone shares something personal, we ask that you don't go and say, so-and-so said this about their child during this meeting, that you kind of try to honor that privacy. But by all means, please help us share what's learned here. We also, the last piece that we have is to be mindful of side conversations in the chat. We will have the chat on the entire time, and we don't want to discourage folks from using the chat, but what we would like to try to avoid is to avoid having the presenters presenting information while there's a back and forth conversation happening in the chat, because then we may not all have the same information at the end when we do get to the dialogue. So do feel free to drop questions in the chat during the presentation. So, if you're afraid you're going to forget it, put it in there. I will be going back and making sure that we start with the questions that we received during the presentation. And toward the end, when we go back, and we'll kind of go back and forth between the questions from the chat and allowing folks to raise their hand and ask their questions or make their comments. So we do hope that we can try to keep everyone in the same conversation for most of the meeting. And is there anything that folks wanted to add in terms of agreements that would make this a more productive or positive experience for anyone? Okay, so we will go ahead and get started. So I'll pass it along to Erin.
Great. Thanks, Allie. So we're here because our students are more connected than they've ever been. Even prior to remote learning, many students were spending most of their time online, or a lot of it, and we want them to develop healthy online habits while they're still in our care in AISD. And in fact, several laws, or federal law, requires us to protect students from harmful material online. So it's important to know that we encourage all of our students to use AISD devices whenever possible. That was really something that we wanted to make sure that we were offering AISD devices to all of our students. Because when students use the district provided technology, that really helps us ensure that learning activities and software run as intended. It helps us provide technical assistance, and it lets us support their learning with software like that, which we'll be sharing with you today. As a data point, a question has come up in the past about how many students have AISD devices and how many have opted to use their own personal devices. So as a data point, 65,255 students have an AISD provided device, and 8,670 have opted to use personal devices. And so when we look a little bit deeper into that data, one of the things we like to share is how that looks for different populations of our students, specifically by race. And so broken down by race, those numbers are about 89% of our Black students have an AISD issued device, about 90% of our Hispanic students have an AISD issued device, and about 82% of our enrolled white students have an AISD issued device. So one of the things that we know that brings us all together today in this conversation is because we care about the safety of our students. And so as parents or caregivers, you may be asking what you can do to help. And so we've come up with kind of 5 big things as reminders. So one, to ensure that devices are used for academic purposes. These devices are first and foremost a doorway to the student's education. And if the device is shared, ensuring that other people who in the household who share that device understand that the devices are first and foremost an academic device, and that they have built-in tools to help our early learners stay safe. Number 2, remind your students not ever to share login and password information. That goes for us too, right? We know that that's one of the best ways to protect ourselves is to protect that information. reinforce safe internet browsing practices. It's helpful to sit side by side with your student to talk about it when you can and the decisions that you make. And remind students that they should not connect their cell phones to their devices. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation. And then revisit AISD technology policies and acceptable use. The most important thing, though, is that our students see us as models of thoughtful digital use as adults, and they look to us as the adults in their lives to try to figure out what this looks like for them. So thank you for being here and connecting with us today. We're going to dive in a little bit more deeply now to some of those tools. So sometimes students find themselves struggling with situations or emotions that they don't know how to handle, don't we all? And they may need help asking for help. So the tools we're going to talk to you about today help us help students in those cases. In particular, they help us intervene quickly when students are considering harming themselves. For lower level online behavior mistakes, such as inappropriate searches or inappropriate messaging, they'll get an auto-generated email that reminds them about the importance of paying attention to their own digital footprint. We know students are going to make mistakes while they learn to navigate in this connected world, and we want to be there to support them when they do.
All right, so I am going to talk to you a little bit about GoGuardian Teacher, the first of the 3 tools that we're going to look at today. GoGuardian Teacher is like the digital version of a teacher walking around the classroom during instructional time. But before we get into what it does, I want to talk about a little bit about what it does not do. First, GoGuardian Teacher does not have access to computer cameras or microphones. It also does not send any automated alerts. So what does it do? GoGuardian Teacher is a dashboard that teachers have that lets them provide guidelines on what students do on their Chromebooks during class. So think of it like a teacher helping students put distracting items away during class in order to help them pay attention or to create a secure environment for testing. And it makes it easier for students to know where to click and what to access online during instruction. So when we first shifted to a remote environment, we heard from teachers who wanted more tools to help students learn to navigate learning remotely, because it's so hard for teachers to help with technology when the students aren't right there in front of them. So for example, we heard from life skills teachers who wanted a tool like this that would let them help their students remotely on their new Chromebooks. So with GoGuardian Teacher, individual teachers determine when to use it. Teachers can block or permit certain sites during instructional time, helping students more quickly reach important websites for class, or helping to minimize distraction. It also lets teachers see a timeline of student internet activity during class time, so that teachers can coach students as our young people develop the skill of staying focused while on a computer. AISD teachers can learn to use GoGuardian by enrolling in a self-paced course that is provided by the district. And we encourage you to ask your student's principal whether or not their teachers have completed the course, and have them check for a recent email from school leadership for more information about it. One other point, we think it's important to know that GoGuardian Teacher restrictions cannot be set by parents. So for me personally, as a parent of 2 AISD children, I struggled with this at first because I wanted to be able to set my own restrictions for when my students were using their Chromebooks. But what was super helpful for me to know is that a student's internet history on an Austin ISD Chromebook can't be deleted. So this is the reason that I required my own children to use AISD Chromebooks until they were old enough to take responsibility for their own digital focus. I used that Chromebook history, that internet history, to have conversations with them about their distraction, and then to set and monitor goals for getting their work done before they did other online activity. GoGuardian Teacher can be used by teachers this same way. It gives teachers a tool that's a foundation for conversations on building that skill of focusing online that our young people really need help developing. So lastly, a quick note that GoGuardian Teacher will be turned off over the upcoming winter break and will be available again when classes resume. So again, if you have any concerns at all about how GoGuardian Teacher is or is not being used in your child's class, we encourage you to connect with the student's teacher and the principal at your school. And I think Kia.
I think we're almost there. Let's see. Well, while we're waiting, my name is Kia Wallace again. I'm the Threat Assessment Coordinator. I've been with AISD for about 3 years. I've made a lot of connections and building relationships. I am responsible for disseminating the safety and self-harm alerts for the district, and that is for GoGuardian Beacon and for Gaggle, and I will explain those a little bit more in depth here shortly. I also am the leader of the District Threat Assessment Team and Safe and Supportive Schools program, and that was enacted by Senate Bill 11. Because I am a little newer to the district, just a little background about me. I've served students in various roles over my career, including I was a second grade teacher at Texas Empowerment Academy. I've also held leadership roles at colleges and nonprofit organizations, such as the Director of Development at the African American Youth Harvest Foundation. I was a donor relations specialist at Houston-Tillotson University, also my alma mater. And I also contributed to the donation that we received for the Community Health and Wellness Center that resides now in East Austin. And then I was also the Associate Director of Corporate and Foundation Relations for DACA students, Deferred Action and Childhood Arrivals, students at St. Edward's University. A little bit more about me is that I earned my Bachelor's of Arts in Elementary Education in a HBCU, which is Houston-Tillotson University. And I am a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, which is an African American sorority committed to public service. And I get a chance to do that every day. And I am also the lucky mother of 2 AISD students that attend Blackshear Elementary. And so when I do this work, it's more important to me that every day when I get an alert, I think of my 2 sons and what I would want for someone to be for them behind the computer. So right now, as Aaron and Sharon has shared, we are very, very digitally connected at this point. And we're missing that human aspect. And so what I do when I receive those alerts are make sure that I still put that human touch into it as I process those alerts and make sure that we're getting the services that the students need. So what GoGuardian Beacon does not do and how it's different from teacher, we don't monitor social media activity. We don't monitor personal devices that are not issued by AISD, so that includes cell phones. And also school or personal email, we do not monitor those. Thank you. So the type of alerts that GoGuardian Beacon does do is self-harm. Identify students' online behaviors that could be indicative of self-harm by analyzing their browsing across search engines. In layman's terms, what GoGuardian will do is the Beacon version will search the internet for any terms that the students may browse for. And it would have to be very specific in order for me to receive a result. So for instance, if a student were to say, I want to kill myself and I plan to do that by eating 8 ibuprofen at 8 o'clock. That's very specific. It very much says, hey, I'm going to plan, I have a plan, I have means, I'm going to harm myself. It will trigger an alert to my computer, and then I will then go into our systems and try to figure out if there's any additional information that would support, okay, the student has already had a history of this sort of information, this sort of instance. And then I gather all that information, and I have some great partners within the district that I work with as first line of communications in order to assist those students. I also do Gaggle alerts, and Gaggle has been a newbie to the district. It started in September, and we've had a lot of conversation about it. And sometimes people get it confused with Gaggle, and they'll say Go Gaggle or GoGuardian, but it is definitely Gaggle, not to be confused with Google. And this tool does not monitor social media activity either, or search engine browsing history. But what Gaggle does do, it's a powerful tool that, if used properly, I think many districts and eventually will kind of catch on to figure out how important it's been. So for me, we're adults, and we tend to think we know everything. And I can tell you from September to now, I don't know everything. I do know that there are opportunities that we can learn from children at times. And this is one of the times in my life from children. They're brave, and they ask for help, and they have friends who are very, very helpful in saying, hey, contact the suicide prevention hotline, contact your counselor. And I'm learning those opportunities from them. And I think at a time like this, when things are so uncertain, and you're not always very brave to say, hey, I'm having a bad day today, those students do that. And I get a chance to see that. And because of that, that makes me react in a quick way in order to make sure they're getting the assistance that they need. So the types of alerts I get are drugs and alcohol, harassment, nudity and sexual content, suicide and self-harm, and violence towards others. It also does monitor all the Google Suite activity when students are logged into their Austin ISD Google accounts. And so I want to make sure that we're clear. So Google, if we have our personal Gmail, you could do that. And then if you have your AISD distributed AISD Gmail, then that is something that we actually will monitor. And we do that in a way where those would trigger an alert. So if it is drug and alcohol, that would be very specific to saying that, hey, I have, cocaine on sale today on campus. If we're interested, that would be something that would trigger an alert. If it was nudity and sexual content, which unfortunately is one of the biggest alerts that I do receive, because I am a civilian, I do the first line of defense is to contact Austin Police Department, which has been Austin ISD PD, which has been incredible as a support system. And they really do, they get the information. There are specialized detectives that work those cases. And the aim is never to shame a child, but the safety aspect is to make sure that they're receiving, when they're sending the pictures or whatever the sexual content can be, that it's not to another adult, or it won't result in sexual trafficking. Suicide and self-harm is much like the GoGuardian alerts, except for it will be very specific in a chat where it's like, I want to die. And then they'll have a supportive friend that will say, have you talked to the counselor? And then again, the last one will be violence towards others, very specific. I want to fight Johnny on the playground at 3 p.m. I'll take the next slide. So the way that I disseminate the alerts is they come directly to me, and I have 3 different playing fields that I use in order to make sure that the student is protected. Usually if it's drugs and alcohol, harassment, and violence towards others, as I defined on the previous slide, they will go directly to the school administrator. The school administrator has already been identified and already are aware of the process. And so they should not disseminate that out. They should be able to take care of it, and they will either contact the student if they are online learner. If they are in person. And if they are online learners, they will contact the parents to make sure that they provide the support that they need. If it is suicide and self-harm, it does go to our wonderful licensed mental health professionals. It also goes to our school counselors, who are amazing. And then it also goes to a special unit called the AISD PD Crisis Intervention Team. So all 3 of them work together to do that wraparound service. And then they include the principal right at the end to let them know what happened with that student. And that part is so important because of the collaboration that there has been over the past couple of months. These are 2 great, huge departments that are able to come together and really be able to protect the over 80,000 students that we have. And then finally, if it is nudity and sexual content, because of the nature, it goes directly to AISD PD, but it's not someone that might be a SRO. It's specifically to a specialized unit that they set up just to do these alerts, and they're really committed. And I can't give them kudos enough, but we have several lines of defense before I just directly go to AISD and PD rather, and just say, can you contact this parent? It has to be very specific, or something severe where it's after hours. The protocol is that I will receive the alert, and then I categorize them according to the nature and severity. I'll review the FERPA and HIPAA protected student records that we have in our student information systems. And then I communicate that alert type and health and safety information with the appropriate professionals, with whether that be an LMHP, an amazing counselor, or an amazing PD professional during grade level school hours. So that applies to elementary, middle, and high school. And they are only identified by student ID number, so that's important to note. So I never put a name in an alert when I'm communicating with individuals, and actually when they respond for the person who did service that student, they actually do it in very secure systems that we've created within AISD. So then if others need to eventually kind of recall that information, if there was a history of this, they're able to do so. So we don't put any of that information publicly in an email. Thank you. And then when the student receives assistance or an intervention, that could be some of the resources that we've already identified. And that could include CIS. I think I saw Suki here, Carrie. It could be many different resources that we will deploy to assist that student. So what does the data shows us, right? So we always want to know, what does the data say? And so what it shows us is from September to about November 16th, we ran a report. And as you can see, we had 1,399 suicide and self-harm alerts. And as you let that sit in, you can imagine that's a really powerful number to see. And we may not have been aware of that without these tools. And then also one of the most important ones is the second highest, which is nudity and sexual content. And those 762 cases that are hard to hear and hard to see daily, they are all tended to by professionals in the PD department who care about those students, those individuals, and it's male and female, making sure that they are actually, this information that they're wanting to disseminate, are they aware that it's actually being sent out to multiple individuals? Because sometimes when they think they're in a relationship and you may send it out to one person, if you're dating them, that may then escalate to several different people. And so that has been something that I've been most proud of, to collaborate with PD between those two alerts. Those have been very major. And then we have 526, and those are for violence towards others wanting to fight, and we've been able to thwart those instances. And then drugs and alcohol, harassment is 134, and 7 is other inappropriate content. Thank you. So the safety and self-harm alerts report card is, I wanted to do a sort of a graph so you can see, if you were wondering, is this more happening with, Title I schools? Is this happening with schools more on the south side of Austin? Is it on the east side? Is it on the north side? So if you want to take a brief second to look at, these are the alerts that we've received to date for these schools. So that means we have about 130 or so campuses. And as you can see, this is less than 130 campuses, but this is definitely more indicative of where we get the alerts from, and who has the highest. And some of that might generate questions in your mind of why are there more middle schools, or why is this high school, or what is happening on those campuses. But I will also tell you, although the numbers are higher on certain campuses, that does not at all reflect on those administrators. They work tirelessly every day, making sure every time they receive an alert, they are on it immediately. So I have to give kudos to them as well. But there are students right now, like I said, they're bigger schools as well. I think Bowie, they have if I may be misquoting, but there are several thousands on that campus. So that's commendable in itself, in order to know that the administrators are totally behind their students. Okay, so we are continuously improving. And Erin, I know you have a couple.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Kia. So as you've heard, these systems are all slightly different and they operate in different ways. But they all contribute to this desire to wrap our arms around our students and support them as they learn in this increasingly digital world. We're continuing to learn from our implementation, though, and our experience and the experience of the community. So as we learn, we have to respond to what we learn. And with the leadership of this team and many more who are on this call and others who aren't, we review our protocols all the time. And as you've seen, the response protocols are reviewed to ensure that the right network of individuals are alerted to support the student first and foremost. We've also identified that there is a continued need for continual training for staff, and we need to continue to educate our students about how the tools work so they're aware of that. And like all educational practices, without intentional thought, we risk exasperating disproportionate disciplinary practices. And so being very thoughtful is something that we have to do all the time. With GoGuardian Teacher, for instance, we have reviewed and updated our teacher online training course. We've sent out a couple of direct global announcements through Blend. If you're familiar with Blend from your students' experience, messages can be targeted directly to our teachers. So reminders to all of our teachers about best practices of using GoGuardian Teacher, for instance. And as Sharon mentioned, during the winter break, we're turning off GoGuardian Teacher so that no teacher will be able to even accidentally leave a session running. In the spring, we'll be relaunching efforts around professional learning and continuing to layer in our cultural proficiency and implicit bias lens. Our training never stops, and building our capacity for effective and sensitive use is the goal of our organization. So hopefully this helps to provide a little bit of insight about those three tools and how they work together.
Thank you, Erin. So with that, that is the conclusion. I know we've been talking at you for quite some time. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Give me one moment. So that I can see everyone. So the way that we're gonna go about the Q&A, I think I saw a few questions go in the chat while we were presenting. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with those questions, but then once, I think there were like 3 or 4, once we get through those, I also want folks to be, feel free to continue adding to the chat, but we can go back and forth. Either I'll grab a question from the chat, or if you wanna raise your hand, either using the raise hand feature, or if you just physically raise your hand, we'll try to go back and forth. So if you'd rather say your question or comment rather than put it in the chat, that's an option as well. The first question I had seen though, and I don't know if we did end up touching on it when we got to the slide, was someone had a question about why it is that we're encouraging folks not to plug their personal devices into the computer. So who can help explain that for us?
Yeah, I can take that one actually. So because when you do, like, for instance, right now we're Apple users, Android users, I will plug my phone into my computer and it backs my phone up on my computer. Well, when I do that, that means all of my photos and everything will go into the cloud. If I am a student and I take my phone and I want to charge my phone, for instance, or if I want to just upload a couple of pictures but may not have even thought anything else about it, it literally, because it is a Google Suite thing such as the Drive or Gmail, if you wanted to send a picture, that will take all of your, if you've uploaded a picture, if you've charged your phone and you have it set up where you back your phone up on your device, that information, such as your pictures, is which it really comes from, will then be you know, it would be sweet, it would be scrubbed, meaning like it would be swept and looked through, as far as like in trying to decipher what images you have put on. You then, you know, opened yourself up to by putting it on the computer. So that's something important.
I want to add another layer to that, actually. The phone plugged into the Chromebook drains the Chromebook battery and actually will kill it. So that's an even better reason, because then the battery actually needs to be replaced. So it's just a bad idea to plug their phones into their Chromebooks.
Thanks for adding that, Sharon.
Yeah.
I've been at a middle school for the last 7 weeks, I think, and kids losing their chargers is the #1 barrier to learning, I think. The next question I'm seeing in the chat is from Ms. Piers, I'm not sure how she says that. Is it a police officer who would contact the child? So I think she's referring to, you mentioned that you do work with APD, so she's wanting to know if it would be our police officers actually contacting the child.
If it is and I see you, Lieutenant Freshour, so if you would like to at some point jump in.
I can address that on the nudity and the sexual content, because our investigations are the ones that will screen all of those. We've only had a couple where we've needed to make contact with the student only to further the investigation to make sure that there was no type of criminal offense such as child pornography or abuse. I would say about 98% of what we look at, we document it, and then we contact the SRO at the campus, and the SRO will let the administration know, because it's a violation of student code of conduct when it's on the device. And then they will also contact the parent to let them know, so that they could educate their student on what they have on their Chromebooks and what they should not have on their Chromebooks.
Yeah.
So that, in a nutshell, that's how it is. And on the other ones, when it comes to the self-harm and violence and things like that, that's going to be on our uniform services side. Now on that, of course, our officer is going to check in with the child, with the counselor. I don't know, Sergeant Sneed's on here to answer that, but on things like that, the counselor or what is it,
LMHP.
Yeah. That they'll make contact, and if it's something where we need to go to the house, then yeah, the officer will make contact. But that's a safety issue. We want to make sure that student is okay.
And I think I also want to add to that, out of all of these alerts that we've received based off of the data that I did show, none of these have resulted into with an arrest. And it's also important to note that the first line of defense in my heart, and I know within this process of when we created it, which I'd like to say thank you to Chief Gonzalez and Assistant Chief Evoy for the support, and of course Lieutenant Freshour. But Assistant Chief Evoy and I sat down and we created this plan for communication. The first line of defense, which we don't always get a chance to see in the real community, right? Where there is, we would love to have a mental health professional attend some of these calls that we're receiving, as adults. And the resources are few. It just doesn't happen right now in our legal system. So, I mean, those are things that maybe, on a larger scale, what we are doing will end up eventually impacting what it looks like for the city or for the county or further. But we do take that approach to the first line of defense is not at all to deploy a PD officer on any of the other alerts unless it's nudity and sexual content. It is the counselors and it is the LMHPs or the school administrator. And so that's very, very important to know. I am a mother of 2 and I am cognizant every day when they walk out of that door. I just need you to make it back home safely. Right? And so I need them to know that, yes, it's a sensitive time, and I never want to introduce a student to a uniformed officer and that be the first interaction you have by you thinking I'm in trouble, because you also should be able to go to them and need help. They've restored my faith. I know definitely, again, with my husband, him also being African-American, we are, it's something that we are always taught. Make sure you keep your hands out of your pocket. Don't do this and don't do that. And so that was one of the things that when we did this, we were super culturally sensitive about that. I'm sensitive as a parent. I want to make sure, and then also be protective of the PD department, because you don't want to go in thinking you're assisting the student and then you end up becoming more of a disruptor instead of being able to help them.
Thank you, Kia and Officer Fresher. I'm just going to remind, if we have folks that are responding to questions, just remember we do have folks interpreting, so I just want to make sure that we're allowing them to keep up with us. I see 3 questions in the chat that I think that we can kind of actually knock out in one because they're somewhat related. So I'll just go ahead and read the 3 questions. Ms. Alvarez from our elementary school's office had asked if we do have the data specific to grade levels, or not grade levels per se, but elementary, middle, and high. Ms. Sawyer asked, does the graph take into account enrollment? So I think she's referring to when we were looking at per school. For that one, it doesn't take into account as in it's just the sheer numbers, right? It's not in proportion. And then the next question I see is if the equity office is involved in the conversation. So a quick thing on data, and I know that we do have Dr. Allen is here, but he has his camera off, so I'm not going to put him on the spot. But we recognize the data we showed tonight it doesn't show the full picture. And so the equity office has actually agreed to support us in, we have a lot of raw data, but we haven't necessarily broken it down and really dug in some of the ways that folks are asking. And so that is something I know the equity office has offered to help us to do, so that we're kind of looking at the right information and looking at it from the right lens. I don't know if there's anyone from the equity office that wants to speak any more about their involvement, or Kia, you want to speak about the ways in which you've worked with them through this.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited. Dr. Allen, I'm not going to put you on the spot either, but he has a really cool background that looks like he's in the library, but he's not. But he's actually a part of the district that assessment team that we have, there you go, put together for to cover Senate Bill 11. So he is a part of that. Shane is also a part. Dr. Stephanie Hawley has been a great advocate for the community, making sure that we are being as transparent as possible and really giving the real of what Gaggle, GoGuardian alerts are. So they should be very commended. It's never anything wrong with saying, hey, I want to know what's best for our students. I want to make sure that everyone is being treated equally. And I don't even want to say equally, right? Because we can all have the same things, but it's sometimes not equitable. So I should say that. And so they've been very, very kind at, educating us on how certain things work. And we use those every day. When I think about, there's a story that I had where there was a child who was Afghanistanian, and the parent, one of the tools was used to figure out how much time this student was using on his Chromebook. And it gave, the way that the report was run by one of the, by a school staff, it said 50% of his time is used on YouTube, and it's using sexual content. Well, if my sons weren't gamers, I wouldn't know anything about Among Us and Fortnite, but I also am, I have that privilege to understand that anime is also, very different. We're not just Pokemon now, they're on a whole another level here. And so it's that cultural sensitivity. So I mentioned that because that was another thing that I got a chance to develop a relationship with, as far as, with the multicultural department. But I do want to say that equity office is really good at that, at doing that well as well, right? So it's like, why are you looking at this certain student? It holds you, to accountability. So I'll stop, and Dr. Allen, if you wanted to add anything.
Well, good evening, everyone. No, I don't have much to add, other than the fact that we are always eager and happy to be part of the conversation and continue to offer the support that we do offer and can continue to offer. So yeah, not beyond what you've already shared with everyone. I don't have too much to add to it, other than we just look forward to being part of the conversation.
Thank you.
Okay, and the questions are piling up a little bit, so I just want to try to ask our ASD staff if we can try to keep our answers brief so we can get to as many as possible, if not all. I do see another question that came from Miss Pires, and I apologize if I'm saying your name wrong. I'm going to go ahead and skip and come back to you at the end if there's time, just because I know that we did, I think, address 2 of your questions. The next question I see is from Ms. Dominguez. She asked in Spanish. She wants to know, what is ASD planning right now in these times of the pandemic, knowing that we're going to see more need in terms of mental health in our schools?
Well, as far as, and I just want to make sure for Ms. Dominguez, is she meaning like virtually?
Give me 1 second.
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and disable the interpretation real quick.
But I can speak briefly, and I probably wouldn't do it justice. I saw Dr. Twyla Williams also come in, and I'm sorry that we're calling you all out, but you guys do so well where you can kind of articulate it in your own language. But I will say that counselors have been doing those minute check in with the student. That was well publicized in the newspaper as well, and I just know that they've done it internally as well. LMHPs are definitely, responding to any mental health services that are needed. We do have a contracted mental health service provider, and then there are mental health officers in the police department.
Okay, Dari, I see you said C in the chat. Did that respond to your question, or did you want to elaborate more on your question? Okay, she's saying thanks for the response. Okay, let's see. I kind of lost my place, but I think I saw Mr. Haynes was next in the chat. So Mr. Haynes asks, if we use GoGuardian for security on, for example, a MOI test middle of year benchmark, if a student has a cell phone or personal device, they can still cheat. Is that correct? And if that is indeed the case, how is that equity and accurate data collection? Do our staff understand that question, or do we want to ask for clarification?
Yeah, we understand it. I think I was
Okay.
I didn't know if Aaron wanted to talk about that. Jamie, that is an excellent question. And I really hope that you're having conversations with your tech design coach and also with your administrators about that issue. I think that I completely agree with you, and I'm hoping, I don't know if Aaron has any more information to share in terms of guidance from the district or what might be the work with the school's office on helping support principals in understanding that. But our goal is that GoGuardian, we understand that that is not how GoGuardian works best.
Okay. Were you going to add to that, Aaron, or I couldn't tell?
I don't know. Sharon and I have had many conversations about this and how just the ability for students to access things on their cell phones, right, outside of AISD devices is a challenge that has always existed and persists with when we build our understanding of what it means to be a thoughtful digital citizen. Then there is hopefully the use of tools that reflect our students' true desire to find out what they really know and don't know, right? So when it comes to authentic learning, when they want to get some feedback about what they know and don't know, then that doesn't become as much of a problem. But it is just like it would be without technology. There are always workarounds that our creative students come up with, right? So that still exists in this context as well.
Thanks, Aaron. I do see we only have 2 folks who have asked questions left. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to skip. I see someone asked 3, and I think we might be able to get to all of them. And I'm going to go ahead and get to Gloria's question, and then I'll go back and see how far into the 3 questions we can get. Maybe we'll still get all of them. But so Gloria, Ms. Berabedoya asked, what is being done at this time to further cultural proficiency for the whole district?
So I would love to talk about our, we have some incredible departments in Austin ISD that they're kind of the heartbeat behind social and emotional learning and cultural proficiency and inclusiveness together. Some incredible, just the leadership around those 2 ideas and how that has, how those teams have built incredible capacity at every one of our campuses with leaders at the campus level, teachers who are engaged in multiple professional learning opportunities, whether it's a leadership pathway experience, which is a 2-year learning with cultural proficiency and inclusiveness, or one of the many kind of in a series of professional learning that the Cultural Proficiency and Inclusiveness Department do. They are engaging with not just our teachers, but our communities and students around having conversations about this. Our academics team is working together to critically look at our curriculum, our assessments, and our instruction, and how implicit bias shows up. I am really proud of the district's work in helping us become more critical of ourselves, right? To really look at how practices manifest. And so besides professional learning opportunities, I think, our district is a no place for hate district, which means, in my mind, which means a commitment to engaging in conversations, whether they're in the hallways, whether they're outside our buildings and with our neighbors, raising the awareness of the need to look at cultural proficiency through all the lenses of education and all the lenses of the community are really important. And so that conscious collective raising of awareness is something that is happening now through multiple means, but we are always seeking to get better, and we still have a ways to go. So those conversations are happening in multiple departments through the guidance, in many ways through the Equity Office has put together several self-reflective opportunities for departments within AISD, even down to looking at our budgets that way. So it has to become the fabric of what we do, and that's a journey that we're on.
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and read all 3 of these questions. I think we can kind of just ping pong who wants to take them. But the first one is, when will the safety and self-harm alert report card have the data disaggregated by race, gender, sexual orientation, grade level, school level, etc.? The second question is, who decides what category is being monitored? For example, violence, self-harm. And then 3, how can race and gender-based violence, harm, harassment be added as an independent category? So I don't know if anyone wants.
The question about how the categories broken down, and they are based off of the companies that these are third-party companies. So Gaggle and GoGuardian are not created within AISD. So Gaggle has those specific areas that they decide for the categories. And then as far as like how I categorize them and submit them to who will work those, that part falls on me. But the categories are already defined by Gaggle. And I think can you repeat the first question, Allie?
The first part was about when we're going to have the data disaggregated by race, sexual orientation, and all the different ways that we can look at it.
Great, no, that's perfect. So that's an interesting question, because we had not gotten granulated in order to figure that out. When I help a student, I know how to look into the systems and figure out, okay, well, he's an African American, he's Asian. So we have not broken the data down that way. Is it possible to do? Absolutely. If you have a suggested time, or if you're making a request of me to do so, then please, contact me. My email address is keya.wallace@austinisd.org. I'll also try to put that in the chat if you have a personal request for that. I don't have a problem working on that, definitely.
I'll just add to that, Kia, because it ties into the question I see that Ms. Elise had asked at the end, which is, we only have 51 participants here, so what additional opportunities are we going to have? So I think definitely internally we need to get better data, get our data in a better place for us to understand it a little better, and then start planning next steps for how we can kind of continue the conversation. And then the other piece of that question, Kia, did you answer about how the gender, race-based violence, harm, and harassment can be added as an independent category? Did you talk on that piece at all?
I did not, but I will say that they are, again, those alerts are generated by Gaggle, but I don't think it's a hard request for me to ask if those are, maybe other categories coming in the future. Currently, there are not, but I can definitely ask. and I would ask whomever that person was. I just put my email address in the chat. If you could follow up with me so I can definitely grant your request and support you in that way, I would love to be able to do that.
Okay. And I was just reminded, you probably see that this meeting is recorded, so we will have this information available for folks who couldn't make it tonight. And then I believe it looks like we might be down to our last question. Or maybe that was our last question. Let's see.
I saw, Ali, a question from Ms. Elise as well about the requirements of the training.
Oh, thank you.
And I also wanted to add to that. I put in, there's a link that I added in terms of follow-up, which is—
Can I interrupt you real quick, Sharon, because I apologize. I want to read the question now that I found it so folks know what you're addressing. So Ms. Solis had asked, how long is the training? Is it a required training? And if yes, is there a time frame in which it must be completed? And if no, why not? And she was just referencing and asking her, like, the suggestion that you ask your principal, has your staff been trained? Sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
No, that's okay. The training is short. It is self-paced, so teachers can engage with it deeply or less depending on how much they want. But I'd say on the lowest end, it's probably 15 minutes to 45 minutes. It's not required, only because in the many, many, many things that our teachers need to be trained on, this just doesn't fall into the limited amount of time that we have in terms of required professional development for them. But we do encourage teachers and principals to become familiar with it. And especially if the teachers are, if families feel like teachers are not using it the way they would like to see them using it, then contacting the principal and making sure that they know that that's available is a great place to start. And I was referencing the bit.ly/AISD student safety online that I dropped in the chat. That's a flyer that we're going to be sharing out as well. And that has information about the three tools that we talked about tonight, plus internet filtering in Austin ISD.
Thank you, Sharon. And I think we're at 6:30 on the dot, but we have one more question. So I'm going to go ahead and let's go and answer that one from Ms. Steinhauser. Have you looked at the incidence of self-harm relative to the total number of hours in virtual class? In other words, are some schools low in tandem with low numbers logging on or more students back at home? It's a really good question.
This is probably a secret, but the alerts go on 24/7. They're 24 hours a day. So whether you're virtual or in person, sometimes I may be up until about 1 a.m. working on them, from like 7 to 1. And then after that, my children insist that I sleep so I can focus. And then the next day I get up and do them again. So within that period, that's another reason why we have the support from PD, because they're 24 hours as well. So they can catch those, high tier alerts. So they're not low. They're, in my mind, they're all high because 1 is way too many, right? But in general, those numbers that's clear data. Like that's what it is, no matter, is it virtual versus, school hours, if that makes sense, Suki. And good to see you.
All right, thank you so much. So with that, I just wanted to clarify, it looked like Ms. Bedoya felt like 15 minutes was a really short training for CP&I. Just to be clear, the training that we were talking about there, we might have been a little confusing, but was really about the training for using the GoGuardian teacher. And I know that our CP&I department probably would never do a 15-minute training. They're usually several hours to full days even, so. And I'll just read this comment I see from Ms. Alvarez. It might be interesting to compare numbers of alerts between in-person students versus students learning remotely. I think you all have raised some really interesting, we have discussed different ways of looking at slicing and dicing the data, but you guys y'all have brought up some really interesting ways of looking at it. So with that, oh, you know what? If folks don't mind, there was that one question I said I would get back to, and I know that we're very close to being on time, so I'm going to go ahead because I didn't quite understand the question, but the question was, do parents have control to Google not download files or media? And if the person who asked that question, I don't know if you wanted to clarify, I think the question might be in regard to when parents are using student devices or computers. Is that person still with us?
No, my question was because why not to connect the the cell phone in the computer, and then but is that something that I can control, that parents can control in case you connect a cell phone? I say that because my daughter is doing photography class, so sometimes she needs to, and say just connect on the computer. And so is there a way for us to control what gets imported into the Google Drive or not, or no?
Unfortunately, if she and I that's a really good example, and that's why I think it's really important that people know that there is like a special criminal investigation for not a criminal investigation, but a investigation unit for that. So if your daughter is to put her, if she connects it to the computer, it will create an alert. But I will tell you that it's not just because they see an alert they're going to call on it, or they're going to make sure in the greater context of it, right? Because I'm not able to actually open those alerts, what that looked like. So if we end up opening and we seeing it's a statue of David, they're probably not going to make anything. It's not going to go any further than that. We're talking some of this stuff is really hardcore stuff. Girls are trying to impress boys. They're sending those sort of pictures amongst each other. But to your question, then there is no way to stop that. So just to keep that in mind.
Okay. Well,
Thank you.
Oh, Mr. Martin, did you want to add to that?
I was just going to add, yes, that's pretty much a Google device. That's their setup, the way that works. One of the conversations we're encouraging teachers to learn more about this Google connectivity is that the students, if they're using their phones for class and they have Google Drive on their phone, then they don't have to connect a phone to anything. They can use Google Drive to transmit the photography to the course directly right there. So, and that's a really good workaround as well.
Thank you, Howard.
Well, folks, I think we did a pretty good job. I think we got to all the questions, and we're only 5 minutes over, so that to me is a win. I'm really appreciative to all of the folks who came here today, and I do really appreciate all the questions and the folks that made themselves available to respond to those questions this evening. As we've mentioned, we do still have a lot of work to do around this. The conversation's not over. We will regroup with our equity office, take a look at some of that data, and then discuss next steps, how we can kind of continue this conversation, not only internally, but with the community. So again, we're very grateful to y'all, and we hope y'all have a lovely evening.
Happy holidays, everyone. Be safe.